So why can you be here tonight? Where does 15x4 come from? The format was originally founded in Ukraine and came to Munich about 2 years ago. And since then, volunteers organize this event every single month. This means in the last 2 years, there have been 28 events so far, so this is event number 29 today. And in these events, there were 100 speakers on stage and more than 2,800 guests. And I think that's a great achievement, and we should give a huge applause to the team of 15x4. And also, as the subtitle of the event says, sharing the knowledge, this is not only about learning, about coming together, but this is also your chance to share your knowledge. So if you have a topic in science which you're really passionate about, this is your stage. It doesn't matter how old you are, it does not matter which educational background you have, it does not matter if you have any public speaking skills, because whoever's on this stage is trained and coached by an amazing team of volunteers. So if you have a topic you would love to talk about, come to us, let us know. Speakers for today are fixed, but there will be more events in the next months and more chances for you to share your knowledge. If you know people who cannot be here today because they're either sick or on the couch already or they don't live in Munich, we can also share this knowledge through the internet. We have a live stream on Facebook, so whoever is sitting at home can also be part of this. Just share the Facebook channel. And also not only the videos will be online, but also we take pictures tonight, as you can see, and they can also be found in the Facebook group. So if you have anything else that we have to mention it, please let us know, and I'm sure we will find a solution for that. So let's now get to the main part of tonight, and let me show you the agenda. We will start with the first talk. The speaker is already sitting here waiting. She's ready, and she will talk about leukemia. And from very small blood cells, we go on with the second talk and come to the huge universe and our place in it. After that, we have, as always, a short break. It's about half an hour. We can have some pizza. There's also vegetarian and vegan pizza tonight. So just check out where the signs say vegetarian and vegan. After that, we continue with talk number 3, which is about the self. And a last talk where we hear how we can develop ourselves with a method which is called empowerment evaluation. And the ones who've been here before, they already know that at the very end we always ask you for your feedback, because this event is great and we want it to become even better. And when you take part on the feedback round, you can also be part of a lottery. There are always 2 books which we give to the people, and also tonight there is a special surprise because we have a 3rd prize. So make sure you give us your feedback and you're part of the lottery. Before I keep talking, I would like to give the word to our first speaker. She's been working in the field for about 11 years, so she's a real expert in what she's going to talk about. And I'm really happy she's here. She will talk about fighting leukemia. A big applause for Luise.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's a really great honor for me to be here tonight and to talk about fighting leukemia. When I first started with my PhD project, I was really optimistic. I was working on the genetic basis of therapy resistance in leukemia, and with my thoughts, I was thinking we're going to be able to cure this deadly disease if we just gain more and more information. However, when I progressed with my PhD project, I realized things weren't that easy. During that time, I came across a newsfeed similar to this one by the 𝗍𝗿𝗺, which is a German registry for stem cell donors, and they were looking for a suitable donor for a patient with leukemia. And since I was working in the field, I was honestly a little bit ashamed because I thought I should have registered earlier. So I thought, I'm probably not going to be able to save the whole world with my PhD project, but maybe there's one patient with leukemia who could benefit from my stem cells. So I signed up. And tonight, I would like to give you a basic information about leukemia and also why stem cell transplantation is for some of these patients the only chance for a cure. Leukemia is cancer of our blood cells. Every hour there's a new diagnosis here just alone in Germany, summing up to about 14,000 new cases each year. Compared to other cancers like breast cancer or lung cancer, leukemia are quite rare, making only about 4% of all cancer diagnoses. In children, however, it's the most frequent type of cancer. Leukemia, or the word leukemia, originates from the Greek language, meaning white blood. The disease was first described in the 19th century, and by then the doctors didn't really know what it was. They only observed that in the blood of leukemia patients, they had this excess of white cells compared to the blood of a healthy individual. They even thought it might be an infection, because by that time they didn't really know much about our blood cells. So in order to understand leukemia, we first have to get an overview about how our blood cells are generated. So this is a very simplified illustration of the different blood cells that are existing in our body. They fulfill very important purposes for our daily health. So, for example, we have the immune cells that fight diseases like bacteria or viruses, and you probably all heard about our red blood cells that are important for transportation of oxygen. Importantly, even though all these cells look different, they have different sizes, different shapes, they fulfill different jobs in our body, they all originate from the same blood stem cells. These blood stem cells live in our bone marrow. And they have what we call a self-renewal capacity, which means when they start dividing, they will form a new stem cell, but also a progenitor cell who's already a little bit more committed to becoming a mature blood cell. So the whole maturation process happens in the bone marrow, and once the cell is ready, it will leave the bone marrow and migrate to the bloodstream. In leukemia, the stem cells or the progenitor cells become abnormal. They start to multiply in the bone marrow and accumulate there. Patients with leukemia don't necessarily die of the cancer cells itself, but these cells are not any longer able to produce the mature cells that we need for our health. So this slide summarizes what the doctors back in the 19th century didn't know, that leukemia is a stem cell disorder leading to an accumulation of leukemic blasts. This is the white mass that we saw in the blood sample. And that the patients that suffer from leukemia will lack the mature blood cells. So in the next slides, I would like to talk about how leukemia is treated. Just like other cancers, the standard therapy for leukemia involves chemotherapy. However, there's one big challenge. So leukemia is a disease that doesn't just happen overnight. It's a long progress. It starts with healthy stem cells that acquire gene mutations, as indicated here by these dots. Gene mutations are caused by damages to our DNA, for example, by toxic chemicals or by radiation. So over the years, the stem cells will acquire more and more of these gene mutations, and eventually, when the patient is diagnosed with the full-blown leukemia, we have a genetically diverse disease. When the patient is now treated with chemotherapy, this may lead to resistance of some of these cells because they have acquired gene mutations that make them less sensitive to the chemotherapy. If a patient overall responds to the treatment, he's in a state that we call remission. So the healthy stem cells take over again, but unfortunately, as you can see here, in many times residual leukemia cells are still present in the patient. And over time, these cells start growing again, and the patient suffers from a relapse, which is a reoccurrence of the disease. And unfortunately, at this point, the patients usually don't respond to the chemotherapy any longer. And most patients who suffer from relapse will eventually die. So applying chemotherapy to a patient is always a matter of balance. On the one side, you want to be as harsh as possible to kill the leukemia cells. However, if you're too toxic, you will also affect the healthy remaining stem cells that are left. So doctors came up with a different approach. And this is illustrated here in this slide. In the setting of a stem cell transplantation, the patient will receive a really harsh chemotherapy treatment, and usually this is combined with radiation. The goal of this really harsh treatment is, as indicated here by this cross, to really get rid of as many cells in the bone marrow as possible. And after this harsh treatment, the patient receives donor stem cells from a healthy individual. Over time, these stem cells will repopulate the bone marrow and start to regenerate all the mature blood cells that we have talked about before. There's one big problem with this approach. You've probably heard about immune reactions when a patient receives a kidney or a lung transplant. In the setting of a stem cell transplantation, we are actually transplanting the immune system of a donor into the leukemia patient. So the immune cells will realize they're in a foreign environment and actually start to attack the body of the patient. So when we choose a donor for a leukemia patient, we have to make sure that this immune reaction is very little. But how can we predict that? The immune cells will recognize a foreign cell by cell surface markers. So if the cell surface markers of the donor and the recipient are pretty similar, the immune reaction will be little. And the type and the shape of these cell surface markers are encoded in our DNA. So when we're choosing a right donor, we have to perform genetic analysis. We are characterizing what is so-called the 𝗍𝗿 type. Therefore, we look at 5 different genetic markers. For each of these markers, we have 2 versions, one that we got from our mother and the other one that we got from our father. But unfortunately, due to our genetic variety, there are not just 2 versions of these genes. In the whole human population, we have hundreds of different versions of these genetic markers. So just looking at these 5 genetic markers, we have 10,000 of possible combinations. That makes us unique. However, it makes it also hard to find a donor that is genetically similar to us or to the leukemia patient. So the search for a suitable donor usually starts within the family because family members are genetically similar. A perfect match would mean that the 2 versions for all of the 5 markers that we're looking at are identical. Our mother or our father will never be a perfect match because we get 50% of the genetic information from each of them. But then when we look at siblings, since they usually share the same genetic pool, there's a 25% chance for every of our brothers or sister to be a perfect match. So the more siblings you have, the greater are your chances to find a suitable donor. So that's the reason why you should always be nice to your siblings, right? Because eventually they could save your life. When you look at other family members, such as cousins, the chances are very little actually to find a perfect match. Overall, only about 20 to 30% of leukemia patients will find a matching donor within the family. So the majority of them depends on an unrelated donor. But how can we find that? Especially when you think of the genetic variety, it's really like searching for a needle in a haystack. So national and international registries have been set up to facilitate the search to find a suitable donor, and that's what I will be talking about in the next couple of slides. The 𝗍𝗿MS is one of the German registries for stem cell donors. It was founded in the 90s, and so far they have collected, or they have registered about 9 million people. Still, about 10% of leukemia patients won't find a matching donor. So if you're willing to maybe help a leukemia patient, I would like to show you now how you can sign up at the 𝗍𝗿MS. First of all, it's very easy and for free. All you have to do is you go online, you check if you qualify, and you provide your contact information. A couple of days later, you will receive a buccal swab. It basically looks like a Q-tip, and you rub that in the inside of your mouth. That collects enough cells, and you will send that back to the laboratory. They will perform genetic analyses and determine your 𝗍𝗿 type. This information is stored anonymously in a global patient search. So you could not only save someone here in Germany, but basically all over the world. In case you are a match for someone in their database, which actually only happens in 5% of the cases, the 𝗍𝗿MS will get back in touch with you and check if you're still willing and also physically able to become a donor. And then there are basically two ways of how the stem cells are collected. In the majority of the cases, a so-called peripheral stem cell collection is performed. The stem cells that are living in our bone marrow are triggered by a chemical to move outside into the peripheral bloodstream. And then from there on, as shown here in this picture, there's a machine who can basically filter out the stem cells from your blood. This whole procedure takes about 3 to 5 hours, and you see this guy is smiling, it doesn't really hurt, and you can go home afterwards. In about 20% of the cases, a bone marrow collection has to be performed. Some people think you have to get the bone marrow from the spine, but it's actually the pelvic bone, which is close to your hips. It's done under full anesthesia, and the doctors will take a needle to collect about 5% of your total bone marrow. So after a couple of weeks, your body has recovered the stem cells that you have lost. The 𝗍𝗿MS actually did a survey and asked past donors if they would do it again, and actually 95% of them said if they had a chance to donate again for a patient, they would do it. So that just shows that the procedure itself really is not as harsh as someone might think. So, and finally, we have the stem cells. Here, this is a infusion of, or this is a bone marrow sample, and this is really transfused to the patient by the blood veins. And then the stem cells just know to go back into the bone marrow, and from there on, they start to repopulate all the blood cells. The whole process takes about 10 days, and then the patient usually is feeling way better again. Overall, the stem cell transplantation increases the survival chance of a patient by 20 to 30%, which may not seem much, but for leukemia patients who have a really high-risk disease and great chances to have a relapse and eventually die of their disease, this is really the only chance they get to survive. So to wrap it up, I hope I was able to give you an overview about our blood cells and how they're important for our well-being, such as they help us to fight bacteria and virus, and they transport the oxygen throughout our body. Leukemia is a cancer of our blood stem cells, and for some leukemia patients, the only chance to survive this deadly disease is a stem cell transplantation. I would like to point out again that the registration process to become a stem cell donor is very easy. It probably takes longer to order a pizza online, and the procedure itself is not very harsh. So I hope I was able to encourage you to go online. There's even an English version of this website, so you have no excuse if you don't speak German. And register, and yeah. Actually, so statistically speaking, we have about 7 to 8 people in this audience who might be a match for a leukemia patient. And I think this is a thrilling idea that someone here sitting could be saving someone. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much for sharing all your knowledge. We always give you the chance after each talk to ask your questions, which is also a great thing about this event. So speakers don't run away. They stay here, they answer your questions, and they also stay for the break. So if you have any more, you can still talk to them afterwards. So is there anyone who wants to ask anything? We have volunteers running around with microphones, so I think there are people in the back having questions, so the microphone will come to you. You have to go and take questions.
I didn't hear your question, I'm sorry.
If you have an identical twin, how
So
I will just repeat the question for the video recording. The question was, if you have an identical twin, how big is the chance?
So if it's really an identical twin, so who looks the same like you have the same genes because you started from the very same egg, that split during the process. So an identical twin would be, looking at immune reaction, be a perfect donor because you could just transplant any organ and the immune cells would never recognize they're in a foreign person because the genes are the same. But there's one problem. What I didn't talk about is the immune system of the donor will actually also help to fight the residual leukemia cells that are in the patient. So when you transplant the bone marrow from an identical twin, this effect is lost, and and the chances actually for a relapse are higher because the residual leukemia cells don't get killed by the donor cells. That makes sense.
Thank you. Would you mind to throw the cube to the other questions? Thank you.
My question is about the vertical stem cell collection. Because I'm aware that first you have to take certain drugs which increase the amount of stem cells in your bone marrow. So what about the side effects? Because it might, increase the amplification of those cells might cause, increase the risk of mutations and other side effects perhaps. So a few weeks of this drug treatment and then you can donate your stem cells. What about it?
So do you repeat the question, or should I? So the question, so the side effects of the peripheral stem cell collection, right? So you're right, we're giving chemicals that will trigger your stem cells to move from the bone marrow into the bloodstream. And this has only been done for like a couple of 10 years, so the long-term side effects are still unclear. But I think so far there's no data showing that there's really a long-term negative effect. Donors usually feel some pain. That's probably because the cells are leaving like the environment. But I'm not aware that there's really like a really bad side effect of the donation.
My question is, do we know why leukemia is rare in adults but very common in children?
Yeah, so I repeat the question, why leukemia is rare in adults and more common in children. I think that just has to do with the genetic basis of the disease. So usually it's a long process to get a leukemia, and that's why, or cancer in general, if you think of also skin cancer or other cancers, they just happen over years. And then there are some other cancers, and for example also leukemia in children, that are already starting at a very early age. Sometimes we can even trace back leukemia cells already at the blood of the newborn baby, and then the leukemia itself happens a couple of years later. So it might just be by chance that actually these diseases happen earlier, and then other cancers just take longer in their development.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you for your questions. And another applause. So if you like this talk, it's not only live on Facebook, but you can also find it on YouTube. So you can watch it again, and you can also subscribe to the channel and make sure that you do not miss any of the talks coming. Also, we have a shirt shop online on spreadshirts.com. So if you really want to spread our message and you want to wear a nice hoodie or a nice shirt, you can find out where you just go on the side. That's where you find our merchandise shop. So we now continue with the second talk. People at the back, the people in the audience just raise their hands. They have free space next to them, so you can come in front and take a seat if you want. Amazing. Let's then continue with Paul, who's our second speaker, and he's a great example for the fact that whatever you want to speak about on this stage does not have to be your profession. It can also be a great hobby. Paul came to Germany about 4 years ago. He was born and raised in California, and he came here for his job. He works for different software startups. But what he's going to talk about today is a completely different thing. It's just a really great hobby. The first time he used a telescope watching the sky was when he was 9 years old. And since then, he was just so fascinated by what is going on out there that tonight he's here to share this great hobby with us. And I've heard his talk, and it's going to be great. I'm really happy that you are here today to tell us about our place in the universe. Welcome, Paul.
say a few words about our place in the universe. But before I can go into that in depth, we have to talk about a couple of things. Because the universe is big. It's huge on a scale that defies human comprehension. The planets, the distance between stars, the distance between galaxies is so enormous that we can't use regular measurement systems to even talk about these structures. But also, the universe is in motion, still buzzing, 13.8 billion years after the Big Bang. So when we have this discussion, we don't talk about our exact place in the universe, but instead we talk about our relative place, because we are always in motion, and we can tell where we are compared to other things. So, in order to have this discussion tonight, I'm going to break the universe into 5 levels of scale that will make it easier for us to understand, when we look up in the sky, what exactly we're looking at. So we'll start simple, here at Stylight. Here we are sitting in a very stable spot. Compared to the city of Munich, we're at rest. But in fact, at this moment, we are all moving in that direction, which is east, at 1,000 kilometers per hour. Now the good news is the building moves with us, so do the cars, the streets, the air, everything is moving that way, because every 24 hours, we, relative to the center of the Earth, of our Earth's axis, make a 24-hour journey at a very high speed. In fact, the distance is quite fast. We live here north of the equator, 48 degrees north, and at this latitude, we're going to move in the next 24 hours about 24,000 kilometers. Now, the next level of scale up from here is to go up to the solar system, to look at the sun and then the system that we are in, which is the Earth and the moon moving as a unit around the sun. So when we get to this level here, now things are going to change a touch. We are 150 million kilometers from the sun. And those of you that can do a little bit of math will know that that comes out to 950 million kilometers once around the sun. We travel that distance, of course, every year. And if you take that and you break it down into the amount that we're moving right now, our system is traveling at 100,000 kilometers per hour. 100 times faster than we're moving around on the surface of the Earth. That helps us to get a sense of that scale. Now, before we can go to level 3 in our discussion, I want to clarify a particular topic. And that topic is the light year. Now, you being a crowd that's interested in science, you've probably heard of the light year before, but I'd like to say a few things about that, because a light year is not a measure of time. It's a measure of distance. It's a measure precisely of how far light travels in 1 year. So let's think about this. If we're standing here at the sun, and a photon of light now emerges from the surface of the sun and begins moving at the speed of light, that photon will travel for a little more than 8 minutes to reach the Earth. Now, I just said a moment ago that the Earth is 150 million kilometers from the sun. The speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second. If you divide this by this, you're going to get that it takes about 8 1/3 minutes for that photon of light to get to the Earth. So you could even think of this as distance. You could say that we here on Earth are 8 1/3 light minutes from the sun. That's a distance. Now, if that same photon of light keeps traveling, after 1 day, after 24 hours, that photon of light will now be in interstellar space. That is to say, it will have left the solar system and will be on its way to the next star. So a light day, you're out of the solar system. After 365 of those, there's your light year. If you go another 4.4 of those, the next nearest star system to the Earth, which is called Alpha Centauri. So that little photon of light took 4.4 years, and in that time, because 1 light year is 10 trillion kilometers, we can say it traveled 44 trillion kilometers, which is a big mouthful. Or, it traveled for 4.4 light years. Got it? So bottom line is, a light year is a measure of distance. And from this point forward, I'm only going to talk about light years, because that's going to be pretty important at level 3, which is when we talk about a galaxy. And in fact, I'll focus in on our own Milky Way galaxy, where we live. Now, a galaxy is a massive collection of stars that are bound together gravitationally. And in our case, our galaxy has about 250 billion stars, and the distances are vast. From one end to the other, 100,000 light years. Remember, I just said a moment ago, Alpha Centauri, 4. Right? So here we are, 25,000 times that distance across our galaxy. So here we are. That would be our sun and our planets going around, including the Earth. And in fact, there's motion, because galaxies, as you can see, our Milky Way is a spiral galaxy. It has these beautiful spiral arms. We're all moving. We, meaning the Earth, the sun, the solar system, all the stars you can see in the sky tonight. Everything is moving in this beautiful, grand, cosmic dance that takes 200 million years to traverse once around that center of our own Milky Way galaxy. That's the motion happening at the galactic level. Now, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, the early astronomers thought, well, we're in a galaxy, so it seems a lot of stars, and there might be more, but they had no way to prove it. That proof didn't come until just 100 years ago, when Edwin Hubble was able to discern with very powerful telescopes that, in fact, we can also see objects that are much, much more distant than 100,000 light years. And as soon as we began to spot those with the better telescopes of that era, we could quickly determine that there were not a few, not hundreds or thousands, but just an enormous number of galaxies that we could see in the night sky. But the astronomers also discovered that, in fact, these galaxies come in clusters. They group together gravitationally. And then there's vast, empty space. And then the next galaxy cluster. And that takes us to the next level in our little journey, to the local galactic group. That's our home group. This is our galactic neighborhood, so to speak. And this is a pretty big structure, so in order to make sense of this, 10 million light years across. So that is, think back to the Milky Way, one galaxy, 100,000 light years, and now we've gone up by a factor of 100. So here's our Milky Way galaxy, and in fact, once again, we're not sitting still, we're all buzzing around in motion, and the motion that we have today is taking us in the direction of the Andromeda galaxy, which you can see over there on the lower right. The Andromeda galaxy is the biggest galaxy in our local galactic group. There's 54 galaxies. Andromeda is number 1, we're number 2. We're about 2/3 the size of Andromeda, and we're heading toward it. And in fact, in 4.5 billion years, we're going to cross right through. Now, it goes further. We're not yet at the top level, because in more recent years, in just the last couple of decades, our ability to analyze these distant galaxies got even better. And astronomers at the University of Hawaii did a study of 8,000 galaxies and began to look at the motion of all those galaxies. So 8,000 galaxies encompasses a lot more than just our local group. It was all around our section of the universe. And in doing this analysis, what they discovered is what they call a superstructure that they named Lani-Akea, which is Hawaiian, because, well, they're from the University of Hawaii. And Lani and Akea means enormous heaven. Beautiful name, isn't it? And this Lani-Akea superstructure, they saw something interesting happen, because it wasn't just lots of galaxies out there in our neighborhood in the universe. but in fact, there was a motion, there was a movement connecting all these galaxies. That's why they call it a superstructure. And that motion, in fact, by the way, 500 million light years across, so we're talking about big distances. There's our local group. Here we are. And now let's take this to the next level. All of these galaxy clusters are in motion, and when they mapped the motion, this is an image now of, you see these thread-like lines with arrows that are pointing in. In fact, all of the galaxies are moving. We're out here on one of the threads, but we all are moving in the direction of something that they have named the Great Attractor. What is the Great Attractor? But they're working on it. And before long, I'm sure we'll discover even greater superstructures. So that brings us to the universe, or more precisely said, the observable universe in all of its glory here. 46 billion light years that we have identified and documented. But we say the observable universe because that's what we can see, because we can only perceive in the realm of science things that we can see and measure. But what we know is that beyond this border, there are further distances that are yet unexplored. Given today's technology, they will remain out there and unexplored. Now, you don't have to take all this because I'm saying it. You don't have to take my word for it. In fact, you can go outside and see this. So this is a little diagram that I put together from an astronomy package that I use on my laptop. It's called 𝗣𝗿ście. And many of you on your mobile phones probably have different kinds of astronomy apps where you can map what the sky looks like on a given night in a given place. And I put this up with a view to the south to give you a little tour of these superstructures and these structures as we can see them right here. For example, when you look to the south, you can find Jupiter and Saturn, Pluto and Uranus and Neptune and the Moon. And they all follow along a path in the sky that's called the ecliptic. That is to say, when you look out into the sky and you follow this path, what you're doing is you're looking into our own solar system. And now, if we had a little bit darker sky, because this is, of course, a map how things look if it was a bit darker outside, and you go from the southwest of the sky up to the northeast, there's this beautiful, fuzzy band of light. And that's our own Milky Way. That's us in our Milky Way galaxy, looking out at it on the edge. And if you go a step further, when you look a little bit more to the northeast, you're going to spot Andromeda, the Andromeda galaxy. That is to say, our big brother, if you will, here in our local galactic group, up there in that part of the sky. So everything we are here is the Milky Way, and you can look out there and say, another big galaxy out there. And because we live in the northern hemisphere, we can't see all the stars in the night sky, we're limited. But if we could travel south of the equator, we could go down, if you're in South America, Australia, whatever, you could then spot a constellation called Centaurus. And when you're looking in that direction, you just have to know and trust that what you're looking at is the direction of the Great Attractor, that place that is drawing all of the stars, the galaxy groups, around the sun direction. So why am I telling you all this tonight? First of all, we are a privileged people. We stand on the shoulders of the giants who came before us. Newton, Galileo, and Copernicus, and Hubble, and the scientists at the University of Hawaii. Those who have shown us the breadth and extraordinary depth of our universe. They've given us a gift, and we can celebrate that. For we, as a people, have more knowledge about our own cosmos than anybody in the history of humankind. But the second reason, and the deeper meaning for me, can go outside and look up and see and know and understand our place in the universe. And having this knowledge enables us to better appreciate that we are just but one people traveling together through the universe and planet Earth.
Thank you so much for There's the first question in the second row, up here, in front. This please.
That was very inspiring. Thank you, Paul. One question. So, if I remember correctly, in one of the scientific video clips on the YouTube channel, so it was mentioned that actually stellar objects are moving away from each other outside of the universe from the Big Bang center. And at some point, the distance between the objects will be so large that the lines, even if so many people will not be able to cross them, so we will be in permanent coldness and darkness and so on. On the other hand, you're saying all the bodies are moving into the center of the leukemia, so how does it come together?
Okay, I'll repeat it briefly. So yeah, so the basic is this. Let me give you a quick answer. The long answer is during the pizza break. The quick answer is this. Everything in the universe is expanding, right? And we have dark matter and dark energy, which we don't yet fully understand, but we know that there's these forces that are pushing us away. What the scientists at the University of Hawaii did with the 8,000 galaxies study is they normalized for that movement. And they said if you ignore that movement, which is a macro movement across the entire universe, and just localize on our region, then they saw, if you will, a macro effect on top of the general expansion. So, it's like if everyone's running away, but they're all running in one direction, you could say, well, they're running away from each other, but they're kind of in one path. That's the nature of Stylight.
Would you mind? Where's the cube? The microphone
Another
cube.
question over here.
Okay, there's another question just behind the camera. Would you mind to throw it? Can you catch it?
Marcus will catch. He's tall.
Okay. On the slide with the where it highlighted the converging lines to the great attractor, there were also different lines converging in different places. What were those?
So at the same time that we've now discerned that we have a 𝗍𝗏𝗄, on that very image on the left and on the right, there were actually two other superstructures. We haven't fully mapped those yet, but what we do know is that they're not 𝗍𝗏𝗄. So we know that there's another superstructure here, it has a name, I forgot what it is, and there's another one over here, and I think it was called 𝗍𝗏𝗄𝗏 or something like that. Yeah, it's another one over here. So there are two more that we've identified, but we haven't mapped them fully. Yeah, so I have confidence that if we get together in this room in 20 years and redo this talk, we're going to know a lot more stuff about this one. Right? It's just the nature of science.
Okay, so for my question, if you could share some light, how do you actually measure the distances on the subcellular level? It's really interesting. So, what were the challenges, or in general, what was the process of actually understanding it on such a huge scale?
Yeah, on average, when you're measuring distance in the universe, particularly when you get to these extremely distant objects, let me flip it around. When things are close to us, we can measure, we're traveling a very long distance, 150 million kilometers around, so 300 million kilometers end every year on the Earth. And when we look at a distant object, we look at what's called parallax, right? Because if we're here and then we move over here, 6 months later we measure the same spot, we can say, that's parallax. So for objects that are relatively near in the galaxy, we can use that method. For things outside, we use redshift. Because, as mentioned, because we are moving apart from each other for the most part, we can say, Well, the distance to Andromeda, 2.4 million light years, we see this much redshift. If we see even more when you get further out to these more distant objects, we can then estimate the distance out to those further objects. There's more to it than that, but that's it.
Thank you, Paul, very much.
I'd like to
As you know, we go into break now. There is one more special thing today, which is a photo box. It's just on my left, on your right hand side. So if you want to take some items and take some fancy pictures, that's the place where you can do it. And apart from that, you can find pizza, enjoy the break, and we see each other in 30 minutes, so 8:20.